أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الأعزاء وحلقة جديدة من أمريكا. ضيفنا اليوم دبلوماسي أمريكي مخضرم عمل لسنوات طويلة في إدارة ملف النزاع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي. ضيفنا اليوم السفير الأمريكي الأسبق لدى إسرائيل السيد مارتن إنديك. أهلا بك جناب السفير.
أهلا بك.
اسمح لي قبل أن أبدأ معك هذا الحوار أن نتابع هذا التقرير الذي يعرض بعض الملامح من سيرتك المهنية. نشاهد التقرير ثم نعود لمواصلة الحوار.
مارتن إنديك أحد أبرز مهندسي السياسة الأمريكية للتوصل إلى سلام في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. تخرج في جامعة سيدني عام 1972 وحصل على درجة الدكتوراه في العلاقات الدولية من الجامعة الوطنية الأسترالية عام 1977. بدأ إنديك حياته السياسية في الولايات المتحدة عام 1982 بالعمل مع مجموعة ضغط إسرائيلية في واشنطن، وشغل خلال مسيرته الدبلوماسية عددا من المناصب المهمة. اختير إنديك سفيرا أمريكيا لدى إسرائيل مرتين، وشغل العديد من المناصب الرفيعة في إدارة الرئيس الأمريكي الأسبق بيل كلينتون. واختاره الرئيس الأمريكي السابق باراك أوباما عام 2013 مبعوثا خاصا للولايات المتحدة لمفاوضات السلام الفلسطينية الإسرائيلية. نشر إنديك على نطاق واسع السياسة الأمريكية تجاه عملية السلام العربية الإسرائيلية والعلاقات الأمريكية الإسرائيلية. شغل إنديك منصب المدير التنفيذي المؤسس لمعهد واشنطن لسياسات الشرق الأدنى عام 1985، وهو معهد أبحاث متخصص في تحليل سياسات الشرق الأوسط. وبين عامي 2001 حتى 2018 كان نائبا تنفيذيا لرئيس معهد بروكينغز في واشنطن، ثم أصبح زميلا في مجلس العلاقات الخارجية بنيويورك. عمل إنديك أستاذا مساعدا في كلية جون هوبكنز للدراسات الدولية المتقدمة، حيث درس السياسة والسياسة الخارجية الإسرائيلية، كما درس في معهد الشرق الأوسط بجامعة كولومبيا ومركز موشي ديان لدراسات الشرق الأوسط في جامعة تل أبيب.
أهلا بك جناب السفير.
أهلا بك.
أود أن أبدأ معك مستر إنديك بتصريحاتك حول ما يعرف بصفقة القرن. قلت إن هذه الصفقة وصفتها بأنها غير عادلة وأنها لا تلبي تطلعات المستقبل لبناء السلام. ما هو موقفكم من هذه الصفقة وما هو تعليقك فيما يخص سياسات الضم التي يقول كثيرون إنها تعد أحد البنود الرئيسية في هذه الصفقة؟
So, thank you first of all for inviting me onto your program. It's an honor for me. I said that the Trump vision for peace between Israel and the Palestinians was unfair because even though it called for the establishment of a Palestinian state, living alongside Israel in peace and security, all of the issues that we had been trying to negotiate over many years, the final status issues of borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees, mutual recognition, all of those issues, Jared Kushner and Trump's other advisors decided in favor of Israel. All of them. And that's why I believe it was an unfair deal. They did not speak to Palestinian officials beforehand. We can go into the reasons for that, but they did not take their views into account. They essentially took the Israelis' positions and adopted them as the American positions. And I think that that was unreasonable to expect that the Palestinians would agree to negotiate on that basis. The second problem was that they decided to establish a committee to draw up the borders of the state of Palestine, except that the people that they put onto this committee were just Americans and Israelis. The ambassador of the United States to Israel, the ambassador of Israel to the United States, and some other officials, but there were no Palestinians. I call it the Sykes-Picot Committee, because essentially the borders of Palestine were being decided by people other than the Palestinians. And I think that that was the second major problem with the plan.
مستر أمباسادور، قلت إن إدارة ترامب حسمت كل نقاط الخلاف لصالح إسرائيل، ومن بينها قضايا الحدود والأمن والقدس واللاجئين والاعتراف المتبادل. برأيك سيد مارتن، هل إدارة ترامب خسرت موقفها كوسيط دولي نزيه بهذا التحيز في الاعتراف أو تقديم هذه الاعترافات لصالح الجانب الإسرائيلي؟
Well, the most important and relevant international resolutions were those that have always underpinned the efforts to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. And that is UN Security Council Resolution 242 and 338. That was the basis for the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. That was the basis for the Israel-Jordan peace treaty. That was the basis for the Israel-Syria disengagement agreement of 1975. And that has been the basis for all of the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, the problem with 242 is that it does not deal with Palestinian issues in themselves. It has some very important principles which need to be observed, such as the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force, such as the basis for the negotiations being the June 4th, 1967 lines. Now, the problem with the Trump plan is that it tries to avoid Resolution 242. It claims that its plan is in the spirit of Resolution 242, but they use those words to avoid saying that the negotiations should be based on Resolution 242. And they did the same thing with the Arab Peace Initiative, which was the basis upon which all of the Arab states have said that they would make peace with Israel once Israel and the Palestinians had resolved their differences. And they put that issue, that peace initiative, to the side as well. And I think that was a major mistake.
إذن سيد مارتن، بما نفسر هذا التحرك من جانب الإدارة الأمريكية وبتحديها للقوانين أو قوانين الشرعية الدولية، حتى الثوابت الأمريكية في التعامل مع القضايا الخارجية ومن أهمها قضية الشرق الأوسط، بما تفسر هذا الخرق لكل هذه الاتفاقات الدولية؟
Well, I do think that there was a political calculation involved. It's no coincidence that the plan was announced on the eve of Netanyahu's re-election bid. It was designed to try to help him get re-elected on the assumption that he would then turn around and help Donald Trump get re-elected. And it's no secret that Donald Trump's evangelical base of voters is very important to him. It constitutes, I'm not exactly sure how much, but perhaps 50 to 60% of his voters are evangelicals. As we get closer to the American elections in November, I think there's a possibility that sometime in September or October, Jared Kushner will try to bring back the annexation in order to generate more support from Trump's evangelical voters.
بالحديث عن جاريد كوشنر مستشار الرئيس ترامب وصهره، دعني أسألك، هل الفريق المكلف الذي تم اختياره من قبل الإدارة الأمريكية هل هو يملك الخبرات الكافية لإدارة ملف بهذا الحجم وهذا الكم الهائل من التشابكات التي حتى الآن طوال عقود لم تنجح الإدارة الأمريكية في الوصول إلى حل على الأرض للتوصل إلى سلام دائم بين الجانب الإسرائيلي والفلسطيني؟ هل هذه الإدارة تملك ما يكفي من الخبرات لتحقيق ذلك؟
Well, I think that knowledge, experience, knowledge of history of the conflict are all very important elements in devising an approach, which, by the way, the Trump team didn't have any of that. But more important than all of that was the need to talk to both sides and to listen to both sides, to understand what the needs of both sides are. And because they decided to preempt the issue of Jerusalem by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the US embassy there, they lost the ability to talk to the Palestinians. PLO then, from that point on, refused to talk to them. So they really didn't know what the Palestinian concerns were. And all they were doing was at that point talking to the Israelis. There were some Palestinians that they spoke to, but they were not talking to any official Palestinians.
دعني أنتقل معك سيد مورتن إلى جزء آخر نتحدث فيه عن رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي بنيامين نتنياهو. الآن نتنياهو غارق في ملفات الفساد، وهو يؤمن بأن الحصول على الضوء الأخضر من الإدارة الأمريكية هو السبيل الوحيد لتأمين طموحاته الاستيطانية على الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة. برأيك سيد مارتن، لماذا هذا الانحياز الكامل من جانب الإدارة الأمريكية إلى إسرائيل؟ وإلى أي مدى يؤثر هذا على مصداقية دور الولايات المتحدة باعتبارها أقوى راع لعملية السلام في الشرق الأوسط؟
Unilateral acts are supposedly forbidden within the context of the Oslo agreements. Both sides are supposed to avoid unilateral acts. And so annexation is the opposite of negotiation. The willingness of the Trump team to allow annexation, even to encourage annexation, is another reason why this plan is going to go nowhere, because it will not be accepted by the Palestinian side. And I don't think the Palestinian side can be expected to accept a unilateral move. So I think that the reason that this was suggested was really about politics in Israel and the United States, as we have already discussed. The fact that Netanyahu was not able to go ahead with the annexation is, I think, a consequence of Jared Kushner understanding that it not only would make it impossible for the Palestinians to come to the table, but the Arab states also would reject his plan. But as I said, as it gets closer to elections in the United States, as Trump, who's in great difficulty now, he's trailing behind Vice President Biden, the Democratic candidate, it becomes more attractive to him to look at this as a purely political move and disregard the fact that he can't get any Arab or Palestinian buy-in for this. However, Netanyahu is in coalition with Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party. Gantz has said no annexation now, it needs to be after the virus, even if he gets a green light from Jared Kushner before the American elections. I think that for the time being, it's probably unlikely that the annexation will go ahead.
مستر أمباسادور، تابعت في تصريحاتك الأخيرة بشأن وضع الدولة الفلسطينية في المستقبل طبقا لما يعرف بصفقة القرن. أنت شبهتها ببنتستان، وهي في إشارة إلى الأراضي التي كانت تخضع للتمييز العنصري في جنوب أفريقيا. برأيك مستر أمباسادور، ما هي الجهود المطلوبة من الدول المعنية بحل الدولتين فعلها كي ينجح هذا التصور؟
I think that's a very important question. My view on this is that for all of the talk now about one-state solutions, those one-state solutions, not solutions, they are recipes for the continuation of conflict. We don't have a solution, a better solution to the idea that there should be two states for two people, one state for the Palestinian people and one state for the Jewish people, with equal rights for all of their citizens. That is still the only solution. The worst thing that could happen in that regard is annexation, unilateral annexation, because that will kill the hope. So we're very close to a point where we're going to end up with a continued conflict for decades to come. And I think it would be a terrible tragedy, above all for the Palestinians who have had so much tragedy in their lives, for the two-state solution lost. And I say that also from Israel's point of view, because it cannot be, in my view, in Israel's interests, to have a one-state solution in which Jews will become a minority in the state of Israel. So we have to find a way to, first of all, stop the annexation, and secondly, find a way for Israelis and Palestinians to come back to the table and start to look for steps that will rebuild the hope on both sides that their national aspirations can be achieved through a peace that provides independent states for both peoples.
جناب السفير، اسمح لي أن أعود معك مرة أخرى إلى قضية القدس. قلت سابقا إن خطة ترامب منحت السيطرة على القدس لإسرائيل بما في ذلك المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية دون مراعاة للحساسية الدينية، وأنت أشرت إلى خطورة هذا الأمر. ويرى كثيرون أن إسرائيل بأفعالها قد تجر المنطقة إلى حرب دينية. ألا تعتقد جناب السفير أن هذا الأمر غاب عن وعي إدارة ترامب ولم يتم حساب خطورته بشكل واضح؟
I do think that it's important for anybody who wants to try to make peace to be extremely careful about the issue of Jerusalem. Because from my own experience, it is the most sensitive issue. It is the most complicated issue. It involves the religion, the three great Abrahamic religions, Jewish religion, Muslim religion, and Christian religion, and the holy sites of those three great Abrahamic religions. So one has to be extremely careful and sensitive in dealing with this issue. And I say that from experience. My fingers are burned as a result of what we tried to do during the Clinton administration, where I think we came close to a rational solution, but it was not acceptable to both sides. The important thing that Trump did when he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, at the time, he did say that the borders of Israel's capital in Jerusalem would have to be negotiated with the Palestinians.
سؤالي لك سيد مورتن، في حال فوز بايدن في الانتخابات القادمة، هل تتوقع أن تتغير السياسة الأمريكية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط فيما يخص النزاع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي، وأن يكون هناك تعاملا جديدا مع القرارات التي تم اتخاذها في إدارة ترامب مثلا؟
Yes, I think it will be different. I can't speak for Vice President Biden. I'm not part of his campaign, but he has made it clear that he is against the annexation. And I think that if annexation does go ahead and it's recognized by President Trump and Vice President Biden then becomes the president after the elections, I think he will withdraw that recognition of the annexation. It's different from recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, where, as I said before, I think he's most likely to say, we recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. We also recognize that the Palestinians aspire to have their capital in East Jerusalem, and this needs to be negotiated. But if Trump is re-elected and the annexation goes ahead and he recognizes the annexation of Jerusalem by the Israelis, then I think we've crossed a Rubicon which is very problematic, highly problematic for any attempt to resurrect the two-state solution.
رأينا تحركا داخل الكونغرس بشقيه مجلس النواب ومجلس الشيوخ ضد مخططات الضم، وكذلك رأينا حراكا من بعض المؤسسات المدنية مثل جي ستريت على سبيل المثال. برأيك ما هي دلالات هذا التحرك؟
Look, I think it's very important that you have very strong opposition to annexation expressed not just by J Street and other organizations, but expressed by the leadership of the Democratic Party, from Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, where the Democrats control a majority, to Chuck Schumer, who is the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, to Vice President Biden, the presidential nominee. So, and you have a lot of Democratic senators and congressmen who have also signed letters, expressed themselves in opposition to annexation. So I think that's what really matters here, that there's a very strong, united voice on the part of Democrats against the annexation. And if they are able to hold the House, win the White House and Senate, then I think that there's no chance that there will be American approval of the annexation. But we have to wait and see. Strange things, and they sometimes produce unexpected results, as we saw in 2016 when Donald Trump, who was not at all expected to win, beat Hillary. So we have to hold our breath until November.
في نهاية هذا اللقاء أشكر وجودك معنا على شاشة فلسطين من أمريكا السفير الأمريكي الأسبق لدى إسرائيل السيد مارتن إنديك. شكرا جزيلا لك.
شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا مشاهدينا الأعزاء، ونعدكم بلقاء آخر وضيف جديد من أمريكا. إلى اللقاء.